Sometimes to believe in one conspiracy theory, you must give up another. That's the case today. Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out more about the moon. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about the moon. I know we've talked about the moon before, which is why the intro was the way it was. So this was actually released in November as a bonus episode because I want to give you something this week. I just didn't have enough time to put together a full episode, and I only had when I was doing a Patreon, I decided to stop because we only had one patron. And so we might start up Patreon again in the future, but as of right now, we're just going to kind of keep it how it is, just one weekly episode for everybody. So this was a bonus episode. Most everybody didn't hear it, so here it is for you now. So if you hear something that sounds like, oh, for just the fan club only, that's because it was released as just a fan club episode, but now it is for all of you. So I hope you enjoy it, and I will be back next week with an actual full episode that I have done, in time, in real life right now. But let's get into this. We're going to talk about the moon, if the moon is hollow, and if it is hollow, what are the theories behind that? So it's going to get interesting. I feel like every time I do one of these episodes, it really messes with my head. Like the simulation theory episode, that one really got in my head. I was like, are we in a simulation? What the heck is going on? Well, this one kind of gets my gears turning like that a little bit too. So, like I said at the beginning, sometimes in order to believe in one conspiracy, you kind of have to give up your belief in another. But that doesn't mean you can't understand or appreciate both conspiracy theories. You don't have to believe every theory out there to be a conspiracy theorist. I have plenty of theories that I don't believe in and plenty that I do. So it's up to you. I'm just going to present this theory the way it is. So if you believe that we never landed on the moon, for this theory, you have to believe that we did land on the moon. Otherwise, none of it makes sense. So whether you do or you don't, here's the episode, and then you can make your own decisions after hearing everything, right? So for this theory, like I said, we did land on the moon. We're going to start there. We're going to call the NASA people. They landed on the moon, and we're going to go into maybe why they stopped going to the moon, because I brought that up several times in the moon landing episode. I have some theories here. Don't worry. I got them. So Apollo 12 was the second successful moon mission, right? So Apollo 11 went first, then Apollo 12. On this mission, the objective was basically to learn more about what was below the surface of the moon. The first mission was cool, we made it to the moon. They grabbed a couple rocks, I think, probably, and they planted our flag, and they came home. Well, Apollo 12 was oh, we should do some more investigating about, try to learn as much as we can about the moon. So during this mission, the astronauts actually left seismometers on the moon so we could measure and record movement of the moon. So basically they were trying to look for quaking behaviors called moonquakes, similar to earthquakes, but on the moon. Moonquakes. So they left seismometers. We want to know how the moon behaves because of the quakes and what kind of resonance the moon has. These behaviors are related to the properties of the moon and its core. We obviously know how the Earth behaves because we've been monitoring it and we live here, so we can monitor as much as we want to, and we have earthquakes so we can kind of see what's going on. Well, so we can compare the moon seismometer data that we're collecting to the Earth seismometer data and the way we know different elements and how they react. I mean, we have a decent amount of information, so let's compare it to what's going on the moon. It makes sense. So to collect the data that they were looking for, the Apollo astronauts and the scientists at NASA decided to basically crash things into the moon to measure the impact with the seismometers. Their idea was to smash a known mass into the moon, and that would give us more data. So if you know the mass, You know how things act on the Earth's surface. If we were to crash the same amount of mass onto the Earth's surface, this is how it would react. So let's do that with the moon. We're going to crash that mass into the moon and see what happens. See, it all makes sense. You want to limit your unknown variables as much as possible. So that's what they did. When they were taking off from the moon, the astronauts dropped their ascent stage module onto the moon after taking off. So they don't need it anymore. They needed the ascent stage module to ascend down to the moon. But when they come back into the Earth's atmosphere, they use like parachutes to slow down and they land in the water. So they don't need an ascent stage module. So they can go ahead and get rid of that. It's actually the perfect thing to drop into the moon, right? So they did that. They dropped their ascent stage module, and the scientists on the ground here were like, what the heck is happening? Because the moon did not react the way anybody would expect the moon to react. We expect the moon to react similarly. Obviously, it's going to be different, but similarly to what the Earth reacts like. Although, I mean, there are conspiracy theories that the Earth is also hollow, but that's not this episode. That's a whole different episode if we get into that. This episode is the moon hollow. The moon literally rang like a bell, rang for almost an hour. The moon rang. That means that there's a lot of vibration inside the moon, meaning that either there's a lot of like caverns and tunnels and different things under the Earth's surface, or the moon's surface, or it's completely hollow. That's weird, right? That's really weird. And they didn't just do this one time. They did it with basically all the other moon missions that went up to 17, which was the last one. They did every single mission that went to the moon. They dropped either their ascent stage module, they dropped something onto the moon to watch the reaction of it. And the moon rang. And I got this from the History Channel. I didn't just make this up. This didn't come from like some weird website. This came from the History Channel. It was a YouTube that I watched. It's linked in the show notes, of course. But the moon rang? Like, what the heck? Anyway, more on this. So Apollo 17 was the last mission that they conducted, right? They conducted a classified experiment on their trip to the moon called Chapel Bell. Guys, Chapel Bell, I'm going to assume it has something to do with, I don't know, like the ringing of a bell or like the hollowness of the moon. So this experiment, mission, whatever, is still classified to this day. But the name kind of implies that it has something to do with the moon being hollow. But like, here's the questions. Here's some questions that I have, because I can't find any information on Chapel Bell. I looked and looked and looked. I looked everywhere, and people all over forums are asking questions like, what do you think? What do you think? You know, and they're throwing out their ideas and their theories. They're all fine and dandy. I decided not to include them here because I want you to come up with your own theories here. I don't want to influence that, or you can go to the forums if you want to participate in that. That's totally cool. But like, why is it still classified? Is it because they proved that the moon is hollow? Is it because they found something else? We're going to get into something else. It's just very odd. I mean, and they declassify things after a long time. It's very odd that it's still classified. It makes me wonder exactly what they found during their experiment. And if this is all true, now I really want to know why they stopped going to the moon. Is it because of what they found during this experiment? Because remember that Apollo 17 was our last mission to the moon, and then all of a sudden we're like, yeah, we're not going back. We're just going to destroy everything, don't let anybody go. And since then, we haven't gone back to the moon, which is one of the biggest things in the moon landing, like the fakeness of us landing on the moon, is that like, why didn't we go back? But if we did actually land on the moon, maybe we didn't go back because we found some weird things. We found some shit we don't want anybody else to know about. Maybe they all, like the governments all got together and they're like, don't send anybody back to the moon because there's some weird things. That's a really solid theory there. So maybe we did actually go to the moon, right? Anyway, one of the theories, or the biggest theory that is circulating out there about the moon being hollow and about what we might have found during this Chapel Bell experiment, is a question. Basically, was the moon placed where it's at by aliens? The fact that the moon is hollow is kind of frightening, honestly, because our planet is not hollow. So this brings us to other conclusions. The moon is already pretty weird. It just hangs out there. It doesn't really rotate like our planet does. And we always see basically the same side of the moon. Not basically, we always see the same side of the moon every time we see the moon, which I learned that recently. Maybe I'm silly. But I recently learned that you see the same side of the moon every time you look at the moon. And that freaked me out because our planet rotates and we rotate around the sun and the other planets are rotating. And if everybody's rotating, but the moon isn't, it's just, is it a planet? That's the question I initially asked when I first learned that we only see the same side of the moon and this was before I even knew about this conspiracy at all. Anyway, if it is hollow, could it be like a satellite or like a spaceship of sorts monitoring the Earth? Because that's a really solid thought. It is hypothesized that the moon is basically an ancient spaceship. The interior would have like fuel for the engines, materials, and appliances for repairs, navigation, communication systems, and observation equipment. So, I mean, it would have everything you would need basically to be a spaceship. Some hypothesize that it being a spaceship would have carried maybe an entire civilization. I don't know. I mean, a small civilization, probably. I don't know. It's possible for sure. I mean, the moon's not as big as our planet, and we're approaching 8 billion people, so it could have been just a smaller civilization, which happens all the time. I mean, if everybody wasn't as connected as they are, we all would have thought that our civilizations were a lot smaller than what it actually is. We have known that the moon has been there for many years, right? We have ancient texts, we track our history, we look back in time because hindsight, right? And we know that the moon has been there forever and ever. And everyone talks about it, and all ancient civilizations that we know of, they have something in their text about the moon. Everybody does. And there is speculation that gods, quote unquote, that have been talked about in ancient civilizations are actually aliens. And I do want to do an episode on that. I'm not trying to offend anybody with their beliefs, but there's a whole conspiracy theory that gods are actually just aliens that have come to our planet. And these speculations, and I've seen a couple, I think, History Channel like shows about this. And I haven't done all the research yet, so I can't intelligibly talk on this. I'm just going to go from my couple of episodes I've seen on History Channel. That mostly when we talk about these gods being aliens, we're talking about ancient civilizations like the Mayans, the Aztecs, these types of civilizations. The type of civilizations that would sacrifice people to the gods, like the sun god or the rain god, different things like that, right? It's speculated that maybe it's the aliens that have come down because of the pictures and things that they've drawn of it. So another thought is that maybe the aliens put us on Earth and then the moon was placed there to monitor us and watch to see how we evolve and develop and kind of what happens here. So maybe they really are kind of like a god type in our world. I don't know. These are, again, speculations. I'm just throwing out everything that I found for you. Some lunar rocks actually predate the oldest Earth rocks that we can find. So was the moon placed there before the Earth actually came into creation? Because the speculation here is that the moon, whatever civilization may have lived in the spacecraft that is the moon, they're dead. They're gone. They don't live there anymore. Everyone's gone. So possible that it's just been there, that they placed us here, and we are now just outliving our creators, potentially. So during many of the moon missions, astronauts brought back moon rocks and such for analysis. The scientists actually found chromium, titanium, and zirconium in these rocks in these things that they have brought back. I'm assuming it's mostly rocks, maybe some dust or whatever they found. The scientists that they took these materials and they tested them, and all these materials with the chromium, the titanium, the zirconium, these are metals with refractory, mechanically strong, and anti-corrosive properties. So these properties would mean that the moon's spaceship would be able to withstand extreme temperature changes of space, because imagine if you get too close to the sun, it gets really hot, and just like being in space typically is pretty cold. So like the coldest of the colds and the hottest of the hots. Your spaceship would have to withstand all of that, and for extended periods of time, as well as taking a beating from meteors and like asteroids, different things that are going to hit the moon. And we know from looking at the moon, all the craters are from the moon being hit by like different things flying into it. Obviously, some of those things are things that we dropped into the moon, but the moon, being a spaceship, would have to withstand a lot. And we, at the time, didn't have the technology to create a spaceship that would be able to withstand and live in space. I mean, we created spaceships. They went up, then they came right back down. And we do have the International Space Station, but that's not even as far out as the moon is. And for this theory, the moon would have had to travel, being the spaceship, would have had to travel to get here to create the planet or to watch the planet be created. So it would have had to be in space for a decent amount of time. Although it is unclear why lunar rocks are such poor heat conductors. They do not conduct heat well, which is weird. But again, of course, there is no like solid evidence that this theory is true. But again, I mean, we're conspiracy theorists. Not every theory is going to have cold, hard evidence. Some of these theories that I've put out aren't even theories. They're actually happening. They do have cold, hard evidence. This theory doesn't, and that's okay. It's just what it is, right? So that's it. That's the whole theory. And I know it's a short one, and I know you're probably looking forward to a really long, juicy theory, but not all of these theories have a lot of information. So I find everything I possibly can for you, jam-pack it into this episode for you. But that's it. The idea is that maybe one day we'll get more evidence. Maybe that's what they found. Maybe they actually found on the Apollo 17 mission, they found that it is a spaceship, and that maybe that's why they didn't go back. Maybe the civilization is still alive. The likelihood is possible. I mean, if we were going to move to another planet, if we were going to create a spaceship that you would go and live on for a long time, you would have to be able to have water and have food and different things that we would need to survive. So, and people to continue to procreate, well, or creatures. I don't know if we're all humans or whatever type of alien, but you'd have to be able to procreate to continue the lifeline. It's possible that the moon is still just observing us, and that it's actually a spaceship of aliens. Maybe aliens live for a lot longer than we do. So it could be the same people on the ship. We don't know. But I like this theory because I have a lot of questions about the moon. So, and it makes sense that like if we actually did go to the moon, that we stopped going for a reason. And Chapel Bell is still classified. So we don't know what they found, and the likelihood of it being declassified anytime soon is probably low, because same thing with the Area 51 thing. If people really knew the truth, there would be mass panic, mass chaos. And so they might end up keeping that a secret forever. I listened to this episode just now before I'm posting it for you all. But this was obviously from November of last year. The ancient civilization I was talking about in the episode is the Anunnaki. And so, of course, I just did an episode on that. I did all the research. Prior to that episode, I hadn't done all the research on the Anunnaki, and that's why in this episode, I didn't have all the information. So if you have any more questions about that and about which ancient alien civilization I'm talking about the Anunnaki. And the theory is that they put the moon there to watch us. And it makes sense a little bit. I don't know. There's a million theories out there. There is also some evidence that maybe they found like skeletal remains on the moon as well. I still have a lot of questions about the moon. I still have a lot of more research that I want to do about it. I haven't done it yet, but I hope you all enjoyed this episode. And until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I'll see you all later. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.